Joseph Gallen, welcome to my Israel-based internet TV talk show, The Lowell Gallen Show. Our guest for today's interview is my old friend, Professor Richard Schwartz.
Pleasure to be here.
Visiting Israel from Staten Island, where he lives for many years. Richard is a retired professor of mathematics at the
College of Staten Island.
And a lifelong champion for the causes of vegetarianism, ecology, and learning about them and putting into practice traditional Jewish principles. Richard, for today's interview, I have two questions because it's a big subject to squish into 10 minutes. The first question is, we have what, over 7 billion humans on the planet today? Is that the correct number?
7.3 billion today, right.
And we have the tragedy of starvation and malnutrition for a couple of billion of them. Is that right?
Almost a billion people. 20 million die annually of hunger.
20 million die a year from hunger.
Yeah.
So here's the $1 million question, or $20 million question, which is, if the grains and the vegetables and the grasses that are being fed to animals to produce meat were fed directly to humans today, is there enough, would there be enough food on the planet for everybody, or is that a Pollyanna pipe dream?
No, definitely that would make quite a big difference. But first of all, I want to give a little background, my qualifications to talk about vegetarianism. And basically I have this book, Judaism and Vegetarianism, 3rd edition, and answers many questions on it. It's very positive on Judaism. And even more important, I have this special tie here with all kinds of fruits, etc. Always provided enough food, but I have this to make sure. And then I have this other tie with all kinds of vegetables. And I'll tell you, if people ate these foods for 100 years, they would live a long, long time.
Now look, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
so
you got that?
Vegetables, a vegetable tie.
And look at this key pie.
I never saw a vegetable tie before, did you?
What about this? All kinds of
wow, really nice. Mine is orange colored, like the orange group of vegetables, like pumpkins. They're very good for you.
Sweet potatoes.
Sweet potatoes. The orange group of vegetables.
I got all this, and most important of all, I'm wearing Fruit of the Loom underwear.
Kol hakavod.
Okay, but getting your question, definitely there can be enough food because it's really amazing. Very sad thing that 70% of the grain produced in this country is fed to animals destined for slaughter. 70%
of the grain produced in Israel, in the United States. 70% is not going directly to people, it's going to animals.
That is correct.
Who are then turned into meat. It takes about 8 pounds
of grain to produce a pound of beef in a feedlot, for example. And what makes this even more shameful, not only are we feeding so much to the animals, but we're taking very healthy, nutritious crops like corn and soy and oats, for example, and which are very high in fiber and complex carbohydrates, very healthy, zero cholesterol, saturated fat. We feed them to the animals, and what comes out? A product devoid of complex carbohydrates, devoid of fiber, very high in complex in saturated fat and in cholesterol. So in addition to the negatives of people are starving and yet we're feeding these grains to animals destined for slaughter, we are also creating a big health problem. So the thing is, we could solve the hunger problem, which by the way is threatening to get very much worse because you mentioned a population of 7 billion. That is projected to be like 9.5 billion by mid-century, 10.5 billion or so at the end of the century, a 50% increase. More people to feed, less land because some of the good farmland is going to be used for highways and factories for the 50% more people. And because of climate change, there's going to be very many negatives. We have many droughts occurring, flooding, so that the food supply is going to go down. And for every 1 degree Celsius increase, there's a 10% decrease in productivity of the soil. So one of the big reasons to become a vegetarian and even more a vegan with no animal products is to help solve the hunger crisis.
You had mentioned before we did the interview, and I was surprised to hear it, but as the Talmud says, he who is ashamed will not learn. Mm-hmm. Israel is a world leader in
Veganism.
Veganism.
Right, definitely.
Could you tell our audience what veganism is,
Okay,
as opposed to being a vegetarian?
Because a vegetarian means a person eats no animal products. I'm sorry, eats no meat and no flesh products. A vegan is no animal products, which means in addition to not eating meat, a vegan does not eat dairy products and eggs, for example. Okay, so that makes a big difference because, by the way, the animals are mistreated far more in the production of eggs and milk. Okay, so this is important. Israel is a leader, and the way that is not at all surprising because there are 6 very powerful Jewish mandates that point to veganism as the ideal diet for Jews and really everybody else. And these are to take care of our health, to treat animals with compassion, to be co-workers regarding protecting the environment, to conserve natural resources, to help hungry people, and to seek and pursue peace. These are all fundamental to Judaism and other religions as well, so that if people took these Jewish values seriously, they really should be vegans. And evidently that is happening to a large extent because Israel is a leader, and there's been almost a surge in the last year or two, more and more toward that. And one reason is Israel has perhaps the strictest laws on proper treatment for animals. Israel, for example, banned the foie gras, which involves really forcing grain down the throats of geese and ducks, and that was banned some years ago. And again, they have some very strong laws on compassion for animals. And to Israel's credit, they're way ahead. A much higher percentage of the population are vegan.
Now, when you say Israel's laws, do you mean the laws of the state of
Right,
Israel reflecting traditional Jewish laws, Tsar Balei Chaim, of being kind and humane to animals?
Absolutely. Because Jews are to be Rahmanim b'nei Rahmanim, compassionate children of compassionate ancestors. We are to emulate God, whose compassion is over all his works, as it indicates in Psalms, actually, chapter 145, verse 9. And Judaism has such powerful teachings on that. It's even part of the 10 Commandments. It says that not only are people to rest on the Sabbath day, but animals as well. A person is not to sit down at his or her meal before making sure the animals have been fed. And the Torah says you can't yoke a strong and weak animal while threshing in the field. You can't muzzle an ox while threshing. And it's really a test for leadership because our greatest leaders, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, the emancipator, led Israel out of Egypt, and King David, both were deemed suitable to be leaders in Israel because as youngsters, as shepherds, they showed great compassion for animals. It's a test for righteousness because the book of Proverbs, chapter 12, verse 10, indicates the righteous individual considers the life of his or her animal. It's a test for choosing a spouse because when Abraham wanted to make sure that Judaism continued and a proper spouse was chosen for his son Yitzhak, and he sent his servant Eliezer to make sure that, and Eliezer set up a test involving, if he found with a woman not only fetched water for him, but for his 10 thirsty camels. And of course Rivka met that challenge. She ran back and forth watering these camels, and therefore it was shown that she had this compassion and even for animals and was worthy to be wife of Yitzhak and to make sure that the Jewish community continued.
When Professor Schwartz says Rivka, he means Rebecca, who became the wife of Isaac, Yitzhak, the son of Abraham, and one of the signs to the servant of Abraham, Eliezer, who was sent from the land of Israel to what is now, I guess, central Iraq, to look for a suitable wife, was that the young lady would show chesed, compassion to not just the servant, but to the entire living world, which is what she did. And that was assigned to Eliezer. This is a suitable wife for the son of my master. What concluding remarks would you like to make for this first interview on Judaism, ecology, and vegetarianism for our viewers?
Well, the concluding remark is that becoming a vegetarian and even more vegan is an important individual choice. It's really becoming a societal imperative because the world now, unfortunately, and this is the opinion of 97% of climate scientists, science academies all over the world, that very, very unfortunately, we're heading toward a climate catastrophe. And what people don't realize is that animal agriculture is one of the major contributors to this, largely because of methane emitted from cows in their digestion and excretion processes. Methane is far more potent than carbon dioxide, so that many things have to be done to make sure we have a decent world for our children and grandchildren. And one of the most important things that every individual can do, starting today, tomorrow, is to become a vegetarian, preferably a vegan. It's the best thing that you can do for your health, the best thing you can do for animals, best thing you can do to have a better environment, reduce the chances of a climate catastrophe, best thing you can do for resources, because it takes a tremendous amount of water, for example, mostly for irrigation of the crops we mentioned before, to grow the grains for the animals. Best thing to help the hungry, as we've been saying, with so much grain goes to feed the animals. And the best thing actually for a more peaceful world, because with all the waste of grain, the shortages there make violence, instability more likely. As our sages saw, the Hebrew words lechem and milchama for bread and war come from the same root. They deduce from that when there's a shortage of resources, people are more likely to go to war. And unfortunately, history has borne that out. So the best thing you can do for yourself and for a decent world to move our imperiled planet to a sustainable path is to become a vegetarian, preferably a vegan.
Richard, thank you very much for the interview, and we thank our audience for watching and listening. Shalom from Jerusalem.
Shalom, shalom. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lowell Joseph Gallen. Welcome to our Root and Branch Association English Language Conference and Lecture Series. We're now celebrating our 20th year. I'm very happy to introduce for this evening's two lectures my old friend Professor Richard Schwartz, retired professor of mathematics from the College of Staten Island, and a lifelong champion of the issues of vegetarianism, ecology, and studying and practicing them within the framework of traditional Jewish teachings. Richard, you're on.
Okay. Okay, I want to thank you very much for that kind introduction, and especially for the 20 years that we've been spreading important messages and making people aware of things. Just want to give a little background of what I've been doing in this. So I've written this book, Judaism and Vegetarianism, 3rd edition, and it's very positive on Judaism and tries to explain everything about the subject. Many questions and answers here. I'm also the associate producer of this video. It's called A Sacred Duty, Applying Jewish Values to Help Heal the World. And that is so important. We've got it on YouTube. We've made it freely available. We've given away maybe 40,000 copies, and because the issues are so important. And in addition, show you the real qualifications here. I have the special tie with all kinds of fruits on it. And if you're not satisfied with that, we also have all of these vegetables on another tie. And done a lot of research on this, and I can tell you, if you eat these foods for 100 years, I guarantee you'll live a long time. Yeah, okay. And in addition, we have this special yarmulke. Again, all kinds of fruits and vegetables. Help spread the message. Mentioned I'm a veggie back here. And most important of all, I'm wearing Fruit of the Loom underwear. So, got all that. Okay, so I want to get into vegetarianism, why it is good for every person, why it's good for the world, why it's essential for a decent planet for future generations. First, I want to point out that in the Jewish tradition, vegetarianism and even more veganism is the ideal. And I say that because God's first dietary regimen, strictly vegan, right there, the very first chapter in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, chapter 1, verse 29, God's indicating all the herbs and all the fruits that people are to eat, and that would keep them in good health. And all the commentators agree that the first dietary regimen was strictly a vegan one. And in addition, not only at the very beginning, but in the ideal time to come, the Messianic period that we all yearn for, that also is pictured, for example, by Rav Kook, first chief rabbi of Free State Israel. He felt that the ideal time would be a vegan period, and he based that on the powerful prophecy of Isaiah, that, for example, the wolf will dwell with the lamb, the lion will restore like the ox, no one shall hurt or destroy in all of God's holy mountain. Okay, so we have the ideal time. Now, in addition, there was another vegetarian attempt, and that was with the manna from heaven that kept the Israelites in very good health for 40 years in the desert. And when they cried out for flesh, it was reluctantly provided in the form of quails, and as people rushed out to get that, a great plague broke out, and that place was called Kivrot HaTava, the graves of lust, an early indication of the negative effects of animal-based diets. Now, these are some indications from the Torah, but there are other indications, for example, the sacrifices, but the great Jewish philosopher, the Rambam, Maimonides, indicated that this was a concession to the times. This was a common mode of worship, and it was felt that if they didn't have the sacrifices, people may have rejected that and all of Judaism, so that was meant to be temporary. It was certainly a step forward. It was far from the pagan practices where it was even human sacrifices, and it was meant to be kept only in one special place, with the idea of weaning the Jewish people away from the sacrifices and into other kinds of religious practices. And of course, the prophets pointed out that certainly the sacrifices were not the idea of what God wanted. He really preferred acts of justice and mercy. And even Yeshayahu, Isaiah, pointed out that sacrifices could actually be an abomination to God if not carried out along with acts of kindness, compassion, for example. And again, according to Rav Kook, again, the first chief rabbi of Free State Israel, he felt again that the Messianic period would be a vegetarian one. Okay, but the basic thing is there are 6 very powerful mandates, teachings, values in Judaism that point to vegetarianism, veganism as the ideal. And I'll mention the 6 and then try to indicate the Jewish teachings on them and how they are violated by animal-based diets. So these are 6 mandates: to take care of our health, to treat animals with compassion, to be co-workers with God in protecting the environment, to conserve natural resources, to help hungry people, and to seek and pursue peace. Okay, so taking care of our health, it says in the Torah, "Nishmatem mi'od nafshotehem," and the rabbis interpreted that as mi'od, very much, very diligently take care of your health, but do kuach nefesh, the idea of to save a life, so important that it overrides all but 3 of the 613 mitzvot. And those 3 it doesn't override would be murder, idolatry, and sexual immorality. So it's very powerful, very important. And of course, one can't properly serve God if not in good health. So you can argue that taking care of health is very important. But many studies have shown that animal-based diets have been linked to, unfortunately, several types of cancer, to heart disease, and many other chronic degenerative diseases. So that we can live far longer, a far healthier life on a plant-based diet. And the fact that it's God's first dietary laws we mentioned in Genesis 1:29, that is consistent with our body structure or physiology. We are far, far from carnivorous animals. Take a look at our hands. Perfect to take an apple or an orange off a tree, pick a carrot or a potato. We don't have claws to rip apart an animal. We don't have those sharp, dagger-like teeth. Take a look at the teeth of a lion or a tiger. Very hard, very sharp. They can rip right through flesh. So we don't have those characteristics. Also, we have a very long intestinal system. You know, it's winding and winding, it's hard to believe, but it would go from well beyond this to the wall, 10, 12 feet or more. And as compared to a carnivorous animal has a very short bowel system, meat is in and out in like one day. They don't have any problem with cholesterol, for example. But our intestinal system is very long, ideal for fruits and vegetables, plenty of time to digest all the wonderful vitamins and minerals in the fruits and vegetables. But when you have meat, long time in the system that can decay, and that's why we have so many digestive problems, antacids, acid acidity that people have. Okay, so we have that now. In addition, our stomach acid is only 1/20th as strong as that of carnivorous animals because they have very strong hydrochloric acid so that they can digest all the meat, protein, etc., whereas we don't have that, and again, many health problems. So, as we say at Passover Diano, if nothing else, the fact that the vegan diet, the plant-based diet is far, far healthier, that alone should indicate that you should be vegetarians and again, preferably vegans. But there's far, far more. And the second mandate is that of compassion for animals. And Judaism has very strong teachings on compassion for animals. For example, we, Jews, are to be Rahmanim b'nei Rahmanim, compassionate children of compassionate ancestors. We are to imitate a God whose compassion is over all his works, as indicated in Psalms 145, verse 9. Okay, so very powerful teachings, and it's a test for righteousness. According to Proverbs, chapter 12, verse 10, it indicates the righteous individual considers the life of his or her animal. Okay, it's so important, Jewish teachings on compassion for animals, that part of the Ten Commandments, which is not only on human beings to rest on the Sabbath day, but animals ought to be able to rest as well. And a person that has an animal is not to sit down for his or her meal before making sure that the animals have been fed, that the needs of the animals have been met. So you can see very strong teachings. It's also a test for leadership. Both Moshe Rabbeinu and King David, two of the greatest Jewish leaders, of course, were deemed suitable to be leaders of the Jewish people because as shepherds, they showed great compassion for animals. A test also for choosing a spouse because Abraham, the first Jewish servant, Eliezer, was sent to pick the proper spouse for Yitzhak or Isaac, and he set up a test that if a woman would offer him water at the well, that would be wonderful, but even more so if she would offer water for the 10 thirsty camels that had just crossed the desert with Eliezer, again, the servant of Abraham. And Rivka or Rebecca met that test and ran back and forth to water those 10 thirsty camels, and therefore was deemed suitable to be a wife for Yitzhak, Isaac, and therefore to be able to continue the Jewish people. So we have all those powerful teachings, but again, powerful teachings from Judaism on one hand, the realities of the world far, far from it, because animals are raised today on factory farms, very cruel conditions. To give a couple of quick examples, egg-laying hens are kept in cages called battery cages, so small they can't even raise a wing. And you can imagine being in one room all the time, and if you just shrug your shoulders a little bit, you hit somebody and all kinds of violence occurs. So instead of increasing the size of the cages, though recently there has been some progress in that, but relatively speaking, there's still very small cages, and instead of increasing it as much as they should, or letting the animals roam freely, what they do is they debeak the birds, so they don't peck each other and harm them, sometimes causing death. And a very painful process without any painkiller or anesthesia. And dairy cows are artificially impregnated every single year, so we're constantly able to give milk. And very painful process going through that, giving milk so often and making it even worse. Their babies or calves are taken away almost immediately. You can imagine the strong bond between a mother and a baby, and that is broken, and very painful process. And often these babies are taken away, for example, we raise as veal, where they're kept in closed, confined, very small spaces, where they can't even turn around in order to produce veal. So we have, again, these strong Jewish teachings, and very fundamental to the Torah. To take care of our health, violated by animal-based diet. We've got to be compassionate for animals, again, strongly violated by animal-based diet. Now, the third mandate is to be a co-worker with God in protecting the environment, and that is becoming more and more important. That is arguably the most important reason today, because there's 7 billion people as of October 2011, now perhaps 7.3 billion people, but there's something like 65 billion farmed animals and a lot of pollution related to that, all kinds of waste products from the animals, and forests are being cut down to raise food for the animals, so that many environmental problems related to that, and perhaps the biggest threat to the world today, that of climate change. Many people are starting to get aware of it with all the wake-up calls in terms of the climate and the drought in so many areas, the floods occurring, and even the blizzards are related to it because there's more and more moisture in the atmosphere as the earth warms up. Okay, and then I'm going to be discussing that more in a second talk that I'm going to be giving. So climate change is a big problem. And animal-based agriculture is a major contributor. There was one study, not by an animal rights group, not by the Sierra Club or people for the ethical treatment of animals, but by the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization report, 2006, Livestock's Long Shadow, which pointed out an amazing thing, that animal-based agriculture emits more greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide equivalents than all the cars, all the planes, the ships, the trains, all means of transportation worldwide combined. You know, think of all the cars out there, or the traffic jams you've been in, or the planes taking off somewhere in the world almost every minute. Think of all that greenhouse gas emissions, and yet animal-based agriculture, even more than that. We mentioned 65 billion animals, like 1.5 billion cows perhaps. They give off methane as part of digestive and excretion processes, and methane is far more potent, 75 to 105 times as effective in warming the planet as carbon dioxide, which is generally talked about in terms of climate change. Okay, so again, we've got the health issue, we've got the passion for animals issue, and we have the environmental issue, and all of them important Jewish mandates, part of the Torah, fundamental to Judaism, all of them violated by animal-based diets. Okay, and a fourth very important mandate teaching in Judaism is that we have to conserve natural resources. This is based on the teaching Baal Tashchit that is related to that important teaching we're going to be reading about in the Torah. Well, actually in some time, but it's Deuteronomy chapter 20, verses 19 and 20, which says, even in wartime, you might think anything goes. You want to win that war, you're not going to be concerned about nature so much. It says, even in wartime, you cannot destroy fruit-bearing trees to build a battering ram to overcome an enemy fortification. And I think one of the greatest things that our sages did is they took that one specific teaching that you can't use an axe to cut down trees in wartime, and they generalized it, not just in wartime, but certainly even more true civilian time, not just an axe, and not just trees, but you can't use any means to destroy anything of value to people. Okay, imagine what a wonderful world it would be if this was taken seriously, because we have such a wasteful world, buy, use, dispose of, constantly urged to keep buying more and more products, keep the economy going. Okay, so how does this relate to animal-based diets? Well, you need far more land on an animal-based diet in order to grow those feed crops. 70% of the grain grown in the U.S. fed to animals destined for slaughter, and you need far, far more water to irrigate these crops, especially in semi-arid areas like California, of course Israel as well, semi-arid area. So it takes, amazingly, 14 times as much water per person on an animal-based diet than for a plant-based diet. Much of that for irrigation, and as you probably know, this is becoming more and more of a big, big issue. The aquifers are shrinking, glaciers are melting. This is going to be a big, big problem. And say we may run out of water before we run out of oil, before we run out of food. So more and more droughts in areas, and it's just like madness and sheer insanity that we're using so much water. Okay, so it's very wasteful. It also requires far, far more energy. Now, if you just have some trees, you pick apples and all, and you grow some grains, compared to meat, where you have to grow the grain, bring it to the feedlots, feed the animals, go through the whole slaughtering process, you need more refrigeration. So again, Baal Tashkit is really violated because the great 19th century Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, pointed out that Baal Tashkit does not mean just destroying, but it also means using far more than is necessary in order to accomplish a purpose. So we all have to eat, it's true, but we can use far less resources on a plant-based diet. So again, there's 4 basic mandates, all fundamental to the Torah, violated by animal-based diets. Okay, the 5th important teaching, again, each one of them by themselves would be enough because, we want to do all the mitzvot, we don't want to violate these fundamental Jewish teachings. But the 5th one is to help hungry people. And we know in the Torah it says you have to leave the corners of the fields for the poor, you have to leave the beginnings of the harvest. On the holiest day, Yom Kippur, when people might think God could not possibly want more, I'm in the synagogue, and not a drop of food or water, my tasting. But we read the powerful prophecy of Isaiah, and he points out the true purpose of fasting in order to awaken us and recognize the hunger and to end oppression and to share our bread with the hungry. So that it's fundamental. There's so many teachings on helping the poor, the hungry in Judaism. But here too, as I've mentioned, God has provided. We say in Birkat HaMazon that Hashem Barachamim has provided enough food for everybody. But when again, 70% of grain in the U.S., 60% or so in Europe, and maybe 40% worldwide, fed to animals destined for slaughter. And madness and sheer insanity, what makes it even more crazy is we're taking very, very healthy foods. Oats and soy and corn, high in complex carbohydrates, high in fiber, and 0 saturated fat, 0 cholesterol. We feed them to the animals, and we end up with a product just the opposite. 0 complex carbohydrates, 0 fiber, but high in saturated fat and cholesterol. So it's really like a double, triple negative on that. And the reality is that while we're doing this, an estimated 20 million people are dying of hunger, and this affects every single year. Almost 1 billion people are chronically hungry. So we have the potential to really sharply reduce hunger. I mean, there's politics involved, of course, other things, but at least we wouldn't have the poor competing with animals, raising the price and all, and making it beyond their control. And in the world where the population is growing, projected to increase something like 50% by the end of the century, and with climate change, with droughts and floods, meaning that our ability to produce food is going to be reduced. Again, it's madness and sheer insanity. that we're using so much land, so much being fed to animals, so much water being wasted, so much energy, etc. Okay, so again, 5 mandates. Okay, so I'm going to just give the 6 mandate first and give a little bit of summary because I want to give some time for questions. Okay, so the 6 mandates to seek and pursue peace, and this one is not as evident what is a connection, but the Jewish sages saw that the Hebrew words for lechem, for bread, and milchama, for war, they come from the same root, and they deduce from that that when there's a shortage of grain and other resources, people are more likely to go to war, and we've seen that way back in the days of Isaac when there were battles over the wells, and more recently battles over oil, so that definitely is that kind of connection. Also, what the climate experts are saying is that with climate change, it makes war more likely because a reduction in resources, and you're going to have tens of millions of desperate, hungry, thirsty refugees fleeing from the effects of climate change. We've seen it already in Darfur, to some extent, in the Middle East. They're projecting a hotter, drier climate, and that makes violence, instability, and war more likely. So actually, to sum up, to give you a chance for some questions, the reality is that the most important thing that any person can do for their own health, for the treatment of animals, for the environment, for reducing the threats of climate change, for the proper and effective, efficient use of resources, for helping hungry people, and for a less violent and more peaceful world is to become a vegetarian, even more so a vegan, no animal products eaten at all, and therefore becoming a vegetarian, vegan, it's an important individual choice, but it's really a societal imperative. If we want to leave a decent world for children, grandchildren, future generations, it is essential that there be a major shift toward plant-based diets. So I thank you for your kind attention and look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you.
Richard, thank you very much for your first of 2 talks this evening on vegetarianism for a healthier you and a healthier planet. And we thank our audience for being here, and our studio audience and our internet TV audience for watching.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, now we'll go to...
Okay, so now we have some questions.
What's your answer to B12?
Okay, B12. Okay, the important thing is that on the plant-based diet, you get all the elements you need. The only one problem is B12. The only reason for that is we now have we're using so many pesticides that the bacteria in the environment are being killed. You need like micrograms of it, and you can get that with a lot of juices, a lot of cereals are enriched with vitamin B12. That's one thing you should check out. But the important thing is an animal-based diet, you're getting too much cholesterol, too much fat, too many other things. Far, far, far more people are stricken with heart disease, cancer, other diseases than are negatively affected by B12, but should be conscious of it, have it tested every year or 2 or whatever. But again, you need very small amounts, and relatively speaking, there haven't been too many problems with that, but it is one thing that should be considered.
Well, what are the sources?
I'm sorry?
What are the sources of B12?
Okay, the sources, first of all, I think was it flaxseed oil, so a good source. And otherwise, as I say, there's many foods enriched with it, and if nothing else, you can take a pill, vitamin pills that have B12 in it.
Can it be synthesized? Can it be synthesized, B12? From chemicals? Can it be built?
Okay, well, yeah, the fact that they have it in vitamin form. There are many people that don't take it because there's a small amount and the body builds up on it over a period of time. So it's not like if you don't have it today, the next Okay, it's small amounts that is for a while, but it should be taken into account. But the thing is, the health crisis of today is far more, not from B12 so much, but far more from meat that has a cholesterol, that has all the additives, the antibiotics, the negatives. Just to give an example, how things have changed. The age of puberty for young women has dropped very sharply. Down, it's still like 16 to 17 in some areas of China where they're still on like a vegan diet, but it's down to 12, and sometimes you have girls, 7 or 8 years already showing signs of puberty. And this is a risk factor for breast cancer, for example. When that happens, because it's earlier beginning of puberty and later menopause. So it's a longer period of time where estrogen is building up much higher amounts of it. So that is a big, big problem. You had a question?
Yeah, I have two questions. One of them is, what is the impact of regular volcano eruptions versus super volcano eruptions in comparison to automobile emissions and airplanes, etc.? Because many people say that why are we really so concerned? One big volcanic eruption puts so much gas into the air.
There's always a natural amount of carbon dioxide, etc., from nature, but so sometimes it's the amount beyond. Just like in our bodies, cholesterol is not something that you should have zero. You need a certain amount. And some of the experts in Framingham said 150, for example, is the ideal cholesterol. But when it gets beyond that, so here too, it's the human element. See, the important thing on this, again, I have a PhD in engineering, but I'm not an expert on science and all that, but that's why you have to go with the experts. It's a scientific method. It's an amazing thing. Every science academy worldwide agrees that human activities is a major factor. Here's an important thing. Has anybody here heard of the group called 350.org? 350.org? Okay, it's mostly in America. Bill McKibben, for example, who wrote The End of Nature years ago, was the start of that. So they have events all over the world. They're really trying to make a difference. Now the reason for that 350.org is that 350 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, that is thought to be like a threshold. Just like I mentioned, 150 cholesterol. If you're above 150, doesn't mean guaranteed to have a heart attack, it just means your risk is much higher. Higher it goes. Same thing here. 350, anybody have an idea what the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere is today? Just last year it passed 400, the first time in human history, 400, and instead of coming back to the safe level, it's like a person with high cholesterol who's increasing rather than getting back to safe value. So it's 400, the highest in human history, increasing 2 or 3 parts per million per year. So that is a big, big threat. That's why they think it's human activities, because if you show a graph of carbon dioxide through history and temperatures, it's like very close to a match.
No, Richard, the question still remains, what is the impact of volcanoes and supervolcanoes? So how does that figure into this model?
Okay, well...
is it necessary to maintain a balance?
Yeah.
Is it
well,
equivalent
the thing is, there's certain things you can do something about, and of course certain things you can't. So the thing is to do things with the things that you can do something about.
Then the question is, from I guess, an engineering point of view, scientific point of view, what percent do we add in addition to what the volcanoes, for example, are doing?
Yeah, well, offhand...
You don't know studies like what would happen if there's a supervolcano eruption, besides the disaster of supervolcano eruption?
Again, it could make a big, big difference. It's emitting things and all, which is more pollution, but also by being up in the sky, it may block the sun's rays to some extent. So certain things we're not sure of. So the thing is, I was saying to one of my grandchildren this the other day, with this tremendous storm, the snowstorm, God has made the world very predictable in a way. You know that in the summer it's going to be hot and in the winter it's going to be cold, but unpredictable enough so that it's sort of interesting in a way. In other words, we know next winter is going to be cold. We don't know, is it going to be less than half, would there be snowstorms, from one year to the next. And that's a big thing, by the way, to recognize the difference between weather and climate. That climate is a long-term trend. Weather is like, if somebody came down from Mars and looked and said, boy, it's snowing all the time, if they came to Israel, of course, how far wrong would they be if they were here just for the last 2 days and they went back to Mars to report, it's a very snowy place, we don't want to be there, it's freezing, and this, that, and the other thing, the roads, you can't even get through with them. So, but the thing is that long-term trends are to, this is more the talk that's coming up, the next talk, but 2014 was the warmest year since 1880 when they started taking temperature records. Every decade since the 1970s has been warmer than the previous one. And all of the 16 warmest years have been since 1998. You know, in other words, it's not like every year it's going to be warmer, but it's going to be with ups and downs. But now, compared to, say, 1970, we were in a range much higher. On the other hand, tomorrow, I was reading New York was extremely cold, the east coast of the U.S. the last couple of days. And yet, January 2015 was the warmest, second warmest January. So you got to take overall things into account. So some things you can take into account. Volcanoes, we don't know. Maybe there'll be an eruption of volcanoes. It'll put so much ashes in the air, it'll block the sun, and it'll be cooled off. So there's always a matter of probability. Even the experts say it's only 95% sure that climate change is happening. And well, it might just be, you know, if you toss 20 coins, if you do it often enough, one time you get almost all heads, almost all tails. Yeah.
Are GMO foods good for people, and what is their effect on the climate?
What?
On the ecology, genetically modified foods?
Okay. To me, it's like an experiment that we don't know, like guinea pigs and all. You know, the thing is, very often people think there's going to be a scientific way of solving the problem, the hunger problem and all that, but there's such a simple answer. As I said, 70% of grain is grown and fed to animals. Can you imagine, instead of that, we had more of the natural processes. So they're trying to build all kinds of things into it. There's this company, Monsanto, that's trying to have a monopoly on the seeds and all. So the thing is, we may not know for years and years, so we're testing it out. It may seem fine, and maybe we'll find 20 years from now it has devastating effects. And we start playing nature, are we better than God in producing foods and all? It may be positive, but the thing is, if we grew food more for people, and the fact that 70% of grain fed to animals, by the way, it's very unnatural for the animals. You know, they were designed to eat grass and all, but that is one reason that they're giving off this methane that has such a very negative effect on the environment, contributing to climate change. So rather than that, if we went back, and again, it'd be healthier, it has all the advantages. You know, sometimes there's negative side effects, but in this case, all the side effects are positive for your health, for the environment, for the use of resources, and also that could be negative. Yeah.
Why do we still have hunger? For example, in Africa, with all of our technology, why is there still hunger?
Why is there still hunger? Well, again, there's a big, big greed factor. And considering, as I said, we're feeding 70% of the grains to animals. And there are other countries who are shipping food to the U.S. It's like a protein factory in reverse and all. By the way that expression was used in terms of meat, that, you know, it's almost like you go to the bank, you put in $100 at the beginning of the year, and at the end of the year you want to take it out, there's only $10. We put in 8 pounds of grain, and we get 1 pound of beef and all that. So part of it is the wastefulness of animal-based diets. Part is just the greed factor. Part of it is because some people are eating far too much. You know, we're malnourished by eating too much of the wrong kinds of foods. Other people are malnourished by not getting enough food. So part of it is poverty. Poverty is a big, big factor.
All these United Nations agencies that are trying to dumping a lot of money into this, why doesn't that work?
They're trying, and they're making it big, and they're making a positive difference. Okay, you know what? We're going to have time for more questions later, but we're going to take a 5-minute break perhaps, and then we'll start with the second talk in about a quarter after. So thanks again for your kind attention. And some nice fruits up here if anybody would like.
Joseph Gallen, and welcome to the second talk this evening in our Root and Branch Association English Language Conference and Lecture Series, now celebrating our 20th year. Our first talk this evening by Professor Richard Schwartz was on vegetarianism for a healthier you and a healthier planet. The next talk that Richard is giving now is on responding Jewishly to Israeli and global climate change and other environmental threats. Professor Schwartz, in addition to being a retired professor of mathematics at the College of Staten Island, New York City, is the president emeritus of Jewish Vegetarians of North America, the author of Judaism and Vegetarianism, and the author of over 200 articles on the subjects of Judaism, vegetarianism, and ecology. Professor Schwartz. And welcome to Israel, and welcome back to our lecture series.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Lo, for the very kind introduction, and again, especially for the many, many years, the 20 years you put into this in trying to educate people. Very few people do that so much, and it's very appreciated. So I just want to reinforce some of what was pointed out, that this is available on the internet. I'm not going to sell some books here tonight. Judaism, Vegetarianism is the 3rd edition, and it's made very easy for me because, thank God for our sages and all, there's very powerful teachings on vegetarianism. Talk about that a little bit more later. But that's only part of the answer, and therefore I wrote another book that does have a chapter on vegetarianism, Judaism and Global Survival. You see, actually, this all came about because for many years I introduced a course at the College of Staten Island called Math and the Environment for liberal arts and science students. They were very poorly prepared, poorly motivated on math, but they had to take a math course for degree requirement. So in order to motivate them, instead of just apples and oranges and all kinds of smattering, smorgasbord of topics, I related all the topics to the environment using basic math, statistics, probability, calculations, how do you read a graph, how do you interpret a poll, etc., in order to create the interest. And that gave me the secular background. So Judaism and Global Survival, Judaism has powerful teachings, get into that more later, on the environment and hunger, many issues. And then, because I thought not enough was being done, although so much is being done in the Jewish community in terms of chesed, rachamim, compassion, who stole my religion, revitalizing Judaism, applying Jewish values to help heal our imperiled planet. So the planet is in peril today. Thank God Judaism has teachings, and that's part of the talk today. In addition, I am associate producer of this wonderful documentary that was really produced by a multi-award winning producer, Lionel Friedberg, and he did it as a labor of love and dedication, not even a penny of a professional fee. And it's such an important message. Again, sacred duty, applying Jewish values to help heal the world, that we've given away about 40,000 copies. We've made it freely available on YouTube, and I have copies that I can hand out later on for people who are interested. And as Lola mentioned, 200 plus articles on the internet, Jewish Veg, Jewish followed by VEG, the first 3 letters in vegetarianism, jewishveg.com/ my last name SCHWARTZ. So anyway, I'm working on this for some years, trying to put it together, applying Jewish values. How can that help heal the world? Okay, the first thing I want to get into is unfortunately the most inconvenient truth you can imagine. A very frightening fact, but we have to be aware of it, address it in order hopefully to be able to avert what is in store for us, and that is that we are heading toward a climate catastrophe beyond anything imaginable. If we want a decent world for future generations, for children, grandchildren, have to address this. And I wish I could tell you this is a crazy notion of mine and maybe a few scientists out there, but this is a consensus, perhaps as strong a consensus as there is in science, on an issue of this type because every single science academy worldwide agrees with that. You know, science academy is a consensus opinion. They all agree that climate change is it's real, it's happening. Human activities with the industry, the cars, burning fossil fuels, etc., is a major factor. And even more important, 99.9% of the refereed articles in respective science journals all that discuss the issue all agree as well. So this is strong consensus, and not just that, but it's facts on the ground that we're seeing more and more. Although there's some denial out there, the world definitely has been getting warmer. Every decade, 1970s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, now in the first decade of the 21st century, every decade has been warmer than the previous decade. 2014, the warmest year in recorded history since 1880 when temperature records were first kept. All 16 of the warmest years, again since 1880, have been since 1998. Almost every year in the 21st century, way up there. It doesn't mean it's going to constantly get warmer and warmer, but we're in a different plane than we were in the 1970s, and it's getting warmer. And another factor is 340 consecutive months have been warmer than the average of all the months of that type since recorded history, 1880. That means, for example, July 2014 was warmer than the average of all the Julys before that. September 2013 warmer than all the Septembers before that. So it definitely is a warming trend. And just as with the human being, when they're warmer, when they have a fever, when they have temperature, there are side effects. Nausea, headaches, just dizziness, not feeling right, very weak. Side effects, so there are the side effects of this warming planet. And they are becoming extremely serious. Okay, so for example, the polar ice caps are melting very rapidly. They're thinking in a few years, in the summer, you may be able to travel around the circuit near the North Pole without interference. It's just melting very rapidly. Of course, the polar bears are very much threatened with extinction because they can swim a fair distance, but as the ice flows after OES are further and further apart, it becomes more and more difficult for them. So the ice caps are melting, and what that means is there's an increase in the height of the oceans. So far, only about an average of 8 inches, but there's potential if the methane that's being buried by ice starts melting in the future. It could be by the end of the century 3 feet. If Greenland goes, it could be 20 feet. Again, it could be catastrophic. Okay, in addition to that, it's not only the polar ice caps melting, glaciers all over the world are melting very rapidly. And this is part of God's plan in a way. They freeze up to a certain extent in the winter, then they melt in the spring when you need to replenish the rivers, for irrigation and all that. So this could be a very negative effect on agriculture. Glaciers all over the world are melting. You see in various movies, they show the glaciers to this extent 10 years later, 20 years later, and once they disappear, that can be a big, big factor in terms of world hunger. Okay, in addition, many, many climate events related to this, droughts, for example, are spreading, deserts are spreading. Some have said this is going to be called the century of drought. There was an article not too long ago, I think an Israeli expert on this, projecting by the middle of the century a very much hotter and drier Middle East. And we'll see later this has implications in terms of terrorism, Africa, many, many things. This is happening. This year in Israel happened to be very good in terms of precipitation, probably above average. That is, again, the difference between weather and climate. One year you can have a lot of rain, but the long-term trend, as we said, temperature, we may have a month that's cool, U.S. now, and I'm speaking really cold weather, and yet January 2014 was the second warmest January since temperature records in 1880 were kept. Okay, so more and more deserts, and what that is doing is drawing the forests. The wildfires have been much more extensive in many areas. California, Arizona, a lot of the western U.S. states had extensive wildfires. Former governor of California said wildfire season used to be 3 months long, now it could be potentially all year long. Okay, so more and more wildfires, more and more storms, and we've seen that, and a lot of people are saying we've had a lot of blizzards recently. 4 blizzards in 3 months in the Boston area, just unbelievable. You know, you think, I hate the snow to some extent, you dig it out, the sun comes out, thank God, but here, you know, before you have a chance to really recover from another one, and some people may say, well, what's going on? Warmer world, how come we're having such cold winters and all? But the reality is that blizzards are more likely due to climate change because there's more moisture in the atmosphere. A warmer world means that more evaporation and a warmer temperature can hold more moisture. So that may be that there might be less precipitation over the year on the average, but when it comes, I think it was last year in Israel, if you drew a graph for precipitation, it would be like a flat line, 0, 0, 0. Then it was a tremendous snowstorm. Remember that? And maybe a whole week of precipitation. I thought problem is solved. But then again, 0, 0, 0. So what's happening is less rainfall overall, but heavier storms. And we just had Superstorm Sandy devastating the east coast of the U.S., and there's 3 factors related to climate change that made that far worse than it might have been otherwise. Number one, as we said, more moisture in the air, so more potential rainfall. The waters are higher, so far not tremendously higher, average of 8 inches, but every little bit helps. So we've got more moisture, and we've got higher ocean, but in addition, we have the warmer waters, and that gives energy. You may recall when Katrina occurred, it hit, and then over the land, it sort of weakened, but then it hit some water again, and the increased energy in the warmer water made it into a heavier storm. So this is why, again, less precipitation. The Israeli Union for Environmental Defense is projecting, and that's one of the biggest environmental groups in Israel, possibly 20 to 30% less precipitation in Israel on the average, but when rains come, often they'll be so heavy there'll be flooding and major storms. And again, flooding resulting from this, from the heavy rainfall, etc. One example, things sort of going up and down, the Mississippi River had tremendous flooding. Then in the summer, it was like a drought. It got so low that barges couldn't pass each other easily. So it was a big problem. Then again, later on, additional flooding. So we're getting all of these problems. And things were so bad in California. They had heat waves, which caused the drought, which caused wildfires. And then again, when the rains did come, there was tremendous flooding and mudslides because the trees weren't there anymore. They had burned down. That would prevent the rain from having so severe an impact. So we're getting a lot of wake-up calls, the droughts, the storms, etc. Okay, we're going to see how Judaism can respond to this, but I just want to point out a few things that indicate why, unfortunately, like they say, we ain't seen nothing yet. Okay, all of the changes have occurred due to a change of perhaps 0.8 degrees Celsius. Okay, now the experts are hoping we can contain the total increase. This is since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, including the 0.8% or 8 degrees Celsius already, to 2 degrees Celsius. Okay, and the reason they're saying that is there's still a chance that we can end up with less than 2 degrees Celsius. Even that would be a disaster. Was considered from 0.8 to 2 is quite a big increase. But now we're on a path to 4 or 5 degrees Celsius. Okay, so unless we make major changes, we are in trouble. Okay, now in addition, the experts think that 350 parts per million is like a threshold value. Just like cholesterol should really not be above 150. If you're above that, you're at more risk for high cholesterol, for a heart attack, etc. Same thing, 350 is the threshold value. We want to try to be below that, but we have already, for the first time in human history, have reached 400 parts per million. And, okay, thank you very much. Okay. First time in human history, 400 parts per million, above the 350 ppm parts per million, experts think is threshold value. We really should try to stay below that. And we're, instead of going back to that 350 safety zone, we're increasing by 2 or 3 parts per million per year. Okay, now in addition, many of the experts feel that we could be very close to a tipping point where things spiral out of control. It's not like a linear thing where, a person's unfortunately maybe gaining too much weight. They can say, if I hit this amount, that's it, I go on a strict diet. We may hit a point, a tipping point, where things spin out of control. And to give you an example of that, imagine now in the frozen north, this is all ice here. The sun's rays come in, and ice is a very good reflector. 70% of the rays of the sun are reflected back out into space. Not a warming thing. But once that ice melts, because of the sun's rays, then you have the darker water or soil, and that of course is not as good a reflector. In that case, sun's rays come in, only 6% is reflected back. 94%, almost all of it is heating up the earth, and therefore, the more that melts, the more heat, etc. It's like a vicious cycle they call a positive feedback loop. This one thing, a lot of people say, climate change, it is a problem, but the most important problem today is terrorism. Look what's going on, unfortunately, in this world, and the crazy beheadings and unimaginable things, and it looks like growing, and how do you stop it? And of course, that is a tremendous problem, and the military is very concerned that climate change is actually a multiplier effect, because, they say desperate people do desperate things. When you have the flooding we were talking about before, Bangladesh, for example, even parts of the U.S., and half the people in Israel live in a coastal Mediterranean plain, you think of Haifa to Tel Aviv, Jaffa, Caesarea, Ashkelon, all these major part where the infrastructure's there. If that Mediterranean rises too much, that can be devastating. And Bangladesh and Florida, so many areas, and many islands are already being inundated. So this is happening. They think a major factor behind the warfare in Sudan is because there was a drought, people forced together, and therefore more of a battle. I think even in the Torah we're told about Abraham and Lot many years ago, far less animals than today, but yet they had to separate. One went one direction, one went the other, in order not to overstress the land. Okay, so, hate to be bad news, but this is the reality. If we want a decent world for children, grandchildren, we have to respond. It has to become a #1 issue. Tikkun Olam, the basic Jewish values, should become central organizing principle, certainly in our schools, get the young people involved. Everything we do should take into account this factor, what we buy, the cars we use, the kind of heating, the lighting. But one of focus, as Lowell indicated, president for many years of Jewish Vegetarians in North America, now President Emeritus. And one of the overlooked factors that can make a major difference is the dietary connection. People know cars are emitting greenhouse gases, factories are. They know we have to change the bulbs and use more efficient lighting. We have to walk and bike and use mass transit rather than using cars so much. But the one thing that many people are not aware of is that the animal-based diet's a major, major contributor to climate change. In 2006, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization came out with a report. It's not the Sierra Club, not the People for Ethical Treatment of Animals, an animals group, an environmental group. The UN Food and Agricultural Organization, which is involved in production of meat actually, but they pointed out amazing fact that animal-based agriculture actually emits more greenhouse gases and carbon dioxide equivalents than all the means of transportation worldwide combined. And when you think of all the cars, planes, trains out there, every minute all over the world, that is quite a bit. And that is due to methane being emitted by these cows, the digestive process, the excretion processes, manure from the animals. Methane, very potent greenhouse gas. Actually, it's from 72 to 105 times as potent in heating the planet as carbon dioxide, though you pretty much always hear about carbon dioxide. And a lot of experts are very pessimistic, as I say, as we head to high atmospheric carbon dioxide and all. Can we avert a climate catastrophe? But they're overlooking one factor that can make a big, big difference, and that is animal-based diet, because it turns out methane has a very small half-life. It's only in the atmosphere maybe 20 years compared to carbon dioxide, which could be for hundreds of years. So that if there was a major shift toward plant-based diets and methane, large amount of methane is removed from the atmosphere, that can make a difference and give us the time to address the carbon dioxide issue. Okay, so what that means is animal-based diets, a major contributor, and therefore everything must be done. As I said, it must become the major focus of everything that's done in the Jewish community, of course, supposed to be a light unto the nations, God's witnesses. We should be foremost in it. Israel is way ahead of many other countries in animal rights and veganism, so hope they'll continue on all that. And just very briefly, I've mentioned the importance of shifting away from climate change, but in addition, the shift to vegetarianism is the best way to reduce hunger, best to improve our health, reduce the soaring healthcare cost, best way to be consistent with the Jewish teachings on compassion for animals, and best environment, best reduce violence, etc. on that. So again, just want to point out that as I promote vegetarianism, one of my qualifications here is special tie that I have, all kinds of fruits. Another tie here, all kinds of vegetables. Special kippah, again, more fruits and vegetables. And most important of all, wearing Fruit of the Loom underwear. So, or if you're concerned about a better world, if you think of people getting married today, having young children, what kind of world are they going to have when we're already seeing so many examples of climate threats and droughts and floods and all kinds of storms and all? What kind of world is it going to be 20, 30 years ago? A warmer world and a world beset by far more storms. So I hope this will be beginning, that everybody will go out there, talk to your rabbis, write letters to newspapers, speak to people, try to affect the political process. You know, there's a lot of debates now as the election is coming up in less than a month here in Israel, but I don't know, I haven't heard hardly any talk about the environment, about climate change. Try to get that onto the agenda. So thanks for your kind attention, and I'll be happy to take any questions people may have.
Richard, thank you very much for your wonderful talk on responding Jewishly to Israeli and global climate change and other environmental threats. I want to thank our studio audience here in our lecture series and our internet TV audience out there for watching and listening. And in a moment we open the floor to questions and comments.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, here's a question.
a large number of the population live on the coasts in every continent, of Australia, Africa,
Of course,
America.
absolutely.
So those people who build close to the shore, what's going to happen to their properties?
Well, it's happening already. Look where I am at Staten Island. Many people lost their homes. Long Island, other areas. It's again, it's the most inconvenient truth there can be. So every area, though, is threatened in different ways. Some by drought, some by flooding. There's reports wherever you live, there are problems, but certainly living nearby. So we've seen this happening. There are people living in islands out in the Pacific, say, and they are in danger of being inundated. They're planning to move to other places. Meanwhile, the population is projected to increase 50% in this century. It's sort of, thankfully, instead of the exponential growth, where really is soaring, it's starting to level off. You know, nothing is 100% predictable, but it may level off at 10.5 billion by the end of the century, but it's 50% more people. Well, it should become the issue. It's the biggest threat there is out there, and yet, I don't know if you heard this expression, denial is not just a river in Egypt. Okay, people are in denial. They don't want to know about it. They're denying it. It's becoming political. It should be scientific. I mean, all these examples, and you can measure things. Waters are rising. The polar ice caps are shrinking. The aquifers are shrinking, etc. So it's got to become a central issue, and everything possible has to be done to avoid it. Otherwise, we are in tremendous trouble. Things are happening already, and they're going to get far worse.
A couple of questions. First of all, as far as I remember, a number of years ago, the United States government set up an organization called EARPA. Do you know what that is?
What?
EARPA. E-R-E-A-R-P-A. ARPA is a part of the Department of Defense, and their job was and is breakthrough. DARPA, right, to create breakthroughs. So
Okay.
DARPA is for Defense Advanced Research. A couple of years ago, another organization was set up called Energy Advanced Research Project Administration. I guess because of the fact that the United States was looking for alternate sources of clean energy.
Right.
So that means that there must be some awareness in the government for global problems, right? Climate problems.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any government initiative or awareness of the things that you said in the U.S.?
Other government initiatives?
No,
Yeah, the
is
government's
there
trying to
awareness of
do a
some
lot.
program?
They're trying to do a lot. Like the U.S. government met with China, for example, the two biggest
No, but with
emitters.
what you said,
and-
animal-based diet, about that.
Yeah, no, but the other factors are happening. There's going to be a major conference later this year, like October 2015, I think. But, and anyway, this is like only a final chance. All the governments get together. Can they agree on moving back carbon dioxide emissions, et cetera, et cetera?
No, but
And
usually
the fact that
talking
the
about
US
industry and energy. I've never heard of any discussions of animal-based diet in
Well,
these kind of
again,
forums.
well, that's why it's important to do this, to get this on the agenda.
Okay.
There's been starting to be some of these reports. It's becoming more and more. You know, they say it's more important to move toward a plant-based diet than to change from a gas guzzler to a electric car or a Prius hybrid kind of car. I mean, that's important too, of course. But changing diet can be more effective. So there has been progress. There's more and more wind power. Solar energy is growing very rapidly. The costs are going down. So there are positive factors, but part of the problem, to tell the truth, is the need to keep growing the economy. You know, what made me very pessimistic just before Thanksgiving in the States. You know, they have the Christmas buying season. Getting in the newspaper a stack of advertising flyers like this from every store imaginable, and a whole month, buy. You know, the economy doesn't grow a few percent at least every year. It's like a calamity kind of thing. So when you have an economy that is pushing people to buy, no matter what, you know, you can't be satisfied. You know, you'd think if somebody has two ties, a few shirts can be enough, but you got to get new suits all the time. They change the styles and all. You got to be in on it. you got to change the car, you got to get a new phone. You know, I mean, some of it's positive, always getting more efficient things, but we've got to realize that we've got to change our style of living to some extent. The diet is part of it.
Diet is somehow tied, at least in Judaism, into religion, right? I don't know how it's tied into Christianity. For example, what would happen if somebody could arrange a meeting between you and the Pope, for example? I know somebody in Manhattan could introduce you.
The Pope, by the way, is going to come out with a very powerful statement about climate change very soon. So I think they're way ahead in some respects. And Christianity, I once read a whole book collection of articles on Christian perspective, but all of them, by the way, pretty much based on Genesis. Because, you know, in Genesis it has people are created, but Solomon came in God's image. There's the idea of dominion, but dominion should be looked at as responsible stewardship. And they didn't mention the very important Jewish teaching about Tashchit, based on Deuteronomy. You can't destroy fruit-bearing trees in times of war, because it was the sages that took that and extended it to a general prohibition. Yeah.
Aside from the ecological destruction caused by the societies based on mass production, mass consumption, and planned obsolescence, I heard the two mathematicians are talking in Riverdale at a Starbucks in August of 2013 when I was there, and one said to the other, the student, the professor, society isn't ready for the fact that by mid-century, most of the jobs that people have won't be needed anymore, which means there'll have to be an entirely new economic theory of why people get paid for what, because they didn't use this terminology, but in effect the curse of the expulsion from the Garden of Eden is being lifted, where you have to work by the sweat of your brow, and most of them be done by robots. So how do then people, the whole concept of work or needing to work won't apply to substantial sectors of the population. Will have nothing to do with them being lazy or untrained or retrained. They just won't be necessary. So it will require a totally different kind of economic theory of how governments provide people with units of exchange, quote unquote, money, food, clothes, water, when not only is their work not needed, it just isn't, it's just, well, they're not needed because it's not there. So it doesn't mean they're lazy or they're unemployed.
Right.
It's everything, the technology outpaces the economic theory. It's just going to require new theories of what work means, and maybe 5% of the population has to work and the others can paint or draw or something.
Well, I don't know if we do that. That's why we should get our wisest people to get together and say, how do we go into the future? There's environmental problems, there's problems you mentioned, that technology is making quite a difference, but there's still a lot of needs out there. Maybe there'll be more emphasis on education, more healthcare, better healthcare, more nutrition kinds of doctors and things. So there will be kinds of, maybe people travel more, and maybe there'll be more need for tour guides and all. So, you know, as one kind of work disappears, others may.
Well, we have a naturopathic doctor right in the audience right now, Dr. Markowitz.
Okay.
Right? So we have a representative of that field right here.
Yeah. Okay, maybe a final question.
Richard, you've been doing this for a long time, and very well, by the way.
Thank you.
And I assume that in the Jewish Vegetarian Society of America, you must know a lot of people. And some of them must know people who know at least people like the founders of Google, or Bill Gates, or Zuckerberg, etc. These are people who invest a lot of money also into philanthropic activities, and they make things happen. So did the Gates Foundation.
Oh, yeah.
Also, the motto of Google is, we shall not do evil. So, for example, why can't one of these people introduce you to Larry Page at Google or something like that, Zuckerberg, and have a discussion with them? These are people who know how to get big things done. For example, Google developed a self-driving car, which is going to be a big thing. Cars which are much more efficient, they drive themselves, we can avoid accidents. Google is a very imaginative company. I guess maybe Microsoft to some extent also, not like Google. So why don't you do that? Why don't you get somebody to introduce you?
Okay, how about you?
I don't know them. If I would know them, I would call them right now.
Fine. You know, we have now a new executive director. That's why I became professor. President Emeritus of Jewish Vegetarians in North America. And we do now have a board, I think somebody high up, I think it was in Amazon, one of the big
Okay.
companies.
All right.
So we're
Bezos.
starting, we have, for example, what's his name, Paul McCartney, one of the Beatles, made a major contribution to us. So we're starting and we're raising money.
What's the reason not to set up a meeting with these people?
Well,
I mean, Bezos at
we're ready
Amazon
to
and...
do it. I've often thought, if we just had one major contributor, what a difference it could make, because we have truth, justice, morality on the side. The other side has all the money. They can pay senators and congressmen. I always say the U.S., for example, is the best Congress that money can buy, unfortunately. You know, the power, you know, when you try to get nutrition laws through, the power of the agricultural lobbies is...
You know, some of these companies can get something done. We used to
No,
think
I
of
agree.
companies as
Yeah, well,
exploiters.
we're
But these companies
working on it,
can do
yeah.
many good things that your organization may
But
not be
I
able to
understand
get
that
done.
Bill Gates is starting to move in that direction toward recognizing that vegetarianism is very important. So maybe things will change, because we need a game changer. And that's why I'm trying to do different things. One of the things I'm trying to do, for example, is reestablish the ancient New Year for animals. You know, just like Schwartz died for many years and the Kabbalists of Schwartz brought it back. That's New Year for trees. The New Year for animals was initially tied in for animals, but we want to restore it and transform it into a day to increase awareness of Judaism, very powerful teachings on compassion for animals and how far the realities are in factory farms and other settings, and therefore hopefully to be a game changer on that. It'll be difficult, but we're going to try to do that. Yep.
About three-fourths of the world, of the earth, is water, the oceans.
Yeah.
Do you do any research on growing food in the oceans? Let's say seaweed, algae, any of these products that could take care of large populations?
We're definitely taking, unfortunately there's a threat there because the oceans are becoming acidified. Somebody pointed out tonight what we do with all the plastics that are thrown in there. We are destroying that kind of resource, and the oceans and everything else is warming up, which is making it more difficult for plant life. Coral reefs are being threatened all over the world. And there was one report that indicated by 2048, most of the fish life in the water will be gone. We are overfishing tremendously, which is a big problem. We have these major factory ships, they're called trawlers. They put out nets that are football fields wide that take everything in. And there's something called sustainable agriculture, sustainable fishing. You know, you take the older fish, and next year, there's a cycle. But when you take everything in, including the young, and a lot of bycatch, so-called, that is a problem. So, as I said, everything should be done, and part of that, everything is doing research. I'm going down to the Arava Institute next month, and they are experimenting on how do you grow food in desert areas. So, technology is definitely part of it, but we can't depend on technology to solve all the problems. It's part of it, but the main thing is that we have to get the consciousness of people to be different, to recognize that this is, I say arguably, but maybe even definitely the biggest threat to the future of the world. And we should be addressing it, but people are not. We have to consider the population that's growing rapidly and seeing about slowing that down to some extent, doing a lot of other things on that. Anyway, thanks very much for your kind attention, and help spread the word on this. Everybody you talk to, and write letters, speak, contact politicians, try to get into the educational system. And San Norman is trying to start a charter school on the environment for kids from 1st to 6th grade. So we're advising them a little bit on that. So everything possible has to be done. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.